All right, Mike Chaput, welcome to Beyond Fulfillment.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir. We are excited to have this conversation. So, Mike, you are the president and the founder of Endsight, and that is a company within the cybersecurity realm and doing a bunch of interesting things there. We'll certainly get into that. But you've got quite a fascinating start to your entrepreneurial journey, which was over 2 decades ago. If you could, just to set the stage for our listeners, can you talk about how you became an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy, unlikely story that's even when I try to tell it, it's hard to believe. But I graduated from Michigan State, your home state, I suppose, and with electrical computer engineering. My first job was with Texas Instruments. I worked there for about 3 years and wanted to get into entrepreneurship. I ended up meeting a gentleman who wanted to sell his business. The business started out as computer reselling, and then it got into kind of installing networks and wide area, local area networks. And so I ended up taking a small business administration loan at 24 years old, along with my college roommate, and we bought this company called PCS Networks back in January of 2000. And the condensed story is something like this: the thing was destined to die in the first month. Like it was if you didn't sell a big project and fulfill a big project, then there was no cash flow and the thing just went under. There was no recurring revenues or anything. And the previous owners like kind of quit on day one almost. It was like the owner was responsible for sales in that thing. We kind of just like mailed it in, and we couldn't figure out how it was going to math out from day one. And somehow, rabbit out of our hat, we ended up surviving the first month. And then rabbit out of our hat, we ended up surviving the first quarter. And then rabbit out of our hat, we ended up surviving the first year. This was, by the way, in the middle of the dot-com implosion. So the entire Bay Area where we were doing business, the market for selling the kind of the technologies that we had been selling kind of just evaporated. And then there was 9/11. And I remember during 9/11, like thinking like, nobody would answer their phones. And if our sales model wasn't just absolutely cooking, like we just couldn't survive. So like people taking a month off of answering their phones and mourning the nation, like meant we were going to be out of business. And somehow we survived. We made it all the way to 2004. So we're 4 years in. And part of the way we survived is we had built a pretty significant software development business, and the lead of the software development business left the business, took the developers, took the clientele, and evaporated the small, tiny margin that we'd been surviving on. And the whole thing kind of went bankrupt. We were in a really punitive, terrible lease. We were just really poor business people in the beginning. At 24 years old, I hadn't managed anybody. I hadn't sold anything. I hadn't led anything. I didn't understand even what a CEO was supposed to do. But here we were, with a big giant debt burden trying to figure out how to survive. And, kind of following the bankruptcy, we kind of gathered ourselves and started another business, which ended up being quite successful over the course of a couple decades. So,
Wow. Okay. So many questions just on that that initial story. I've never heard anything like that. All the entrepreneurs I've interviewed, oddly enough. So when you've been working for 3 years at Texas Instruments, you want to get into entrepreneurship. Like what about entrepreneurship appealed to you at that time?
I kind of feel like one of those kids who was like 8 years old and knew they wanted to be a professional athlete or something. Like my father was a businessman. He had started a supply chain company in the automotive industry. And so I kind of had this mental model of, being a business leader for my father. And he made my brother and I work in the factory like really, really young. So I started working in the factory when I was 13 years old. But unfortunately, my brother kind of liked it. He liked the factory, and he was kind of a grease monkey a little bit. And I hated the factory. Like it was just horrible. And I could go on and on about all the things that wasn't for me about working in a factory. But I knew that I wasn't going to be part of the family business or the family hierarchy from kind of early on. So I kind of had it in my mind that I wanted to do entrepreneurship, be in my own business at some point in time. And I just didn't really know how to get there. So I just kind of studied hard. And then TI was made me a really good financial offer. I figured I would need money if I was ever going to be in entrepreneurship, and I need experience. So I did that as kind of a stepping stone. 3 years in, the corporate culture at TI, I found it soul suckingly draining. So I was just like, I quit by part luck and part like grit and thoughtfulness. I ended up making quite a bit of money at a young age. I started investing that factory money when I was 13 years old, and I ended up putting it in this stock of a bank where my mom worked, and that bank actually grew a lot, and then it sold, and it sold for an all cash offer, like right when I hit TI. So I had this like giant lump of money. And then I was at TI like in 1997, basically, which was right before the dot-com boom. Working at Texas Instruments, we were selling chips to companies like Cisco. And so I had this like technological bent. I started investing all that money from that bank liquidity into these tech stocks, and then they just blew up. And so I ended up like, at 24 years old with this kind of like substantial amount of cash. That's a dangerous thing, by the way, if you're a young person with a lot of cash. You might do something really stupid like me, but I had it. And so I was either going to start a business with it, or I considered buying a franchise, but I wasn't that interested in like restaurants or franchise models. I really love technology. And so when I met these guys who had this kind of computer technology business, I thought this could be for me. I'm kind of a tech head. I love computers. I had a computer engineering degree, and I was able to raise a little capital. I get a business partner, get an SBA loan, get seller financing, and make this deal happen at a very young age. I mean, the reality is, if you're a banker out there, don't make a big loan to a 24-year-old who's never sold anything or led anything. But they did, and that's kind of the way it was back then. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems crazy, right? Like you said, like they loan this money to a young kid to buy this business, and he's got no experience, and
then I negotiated a terrible deal, by the way. Like I didn't know how to do due diligence, and I was so hung up on trying to get the loan, make the loan look right, that I just like I didn't consider all the things. Like I bought an integrated businesses to the business that I started in 2004 called Endsight. And like, the due diligence is like a good part of the thing. You got to negotiate a good deal. You got to come up with an integration plan. You've got to look for synergies or reverse synergies. And, all I was trying to do at 24 years old was get the deal to close, right? We ended up signing a terrible lease, and that's a whole other thing but we never negotiated anything. So, I didn't know what I was doing, and I just got over my head.
If you're still trying to hire locally for every role on your team, you're leaving serious money on the table. Ocean's Talent places AI-fluent executive operators. We're talking finance, marketing, operations, EAs, fully vetted, full-time, and dedicated to your business. These aren't freelancers or shared resources. They're U.S. caliber talent at a fraction of the cost, backed by a 3-month guarantee. And right now, Beyond Fulfillment listeners get $1,000 off their first hire. Go to oceanstalent.com/Dave to claim it. And do you think the person that sold this to you too kind of like realized you were like, I guess, quote unquote, naive and just kind of, like you said, they quit on day one? Do you think they kind of took advantage of the situation?
It was these guys are still alive. They, maybe they're they'll watch this video and have their own perspective on it. My perspective on it was it was a pair. It was 2 guys. One was kind of the founder owner, and one was kind of like the lead sales guy. The business model required really good sales. The majority owner and founder, I think he kind of honestly tried to do what he could to teach me how to run the business. But I think he negotiated a deal such that if the seller note didn't materialize, he was like fine with it. I don't think the guys liked each other that much, and they were just anxious to get away from each other and move on with their lives and take what they could for the business. And they negotiated a pretty good deal for the business such that if the seller note didn't materialize, I think they were like, fine with it. And the guy who led sales, the gentleman who led sales, I don't know, like once the deal closed, he was kind of like, all right, go sell, and I mean, I guess he tried to do a couple sales calls, but they were kind of, they had a toxic element to the culture that my business partner and I didn't understand. They would yell at each other. They would yell at employees. It was like really like TI had I thought a terrible culture too, but it was like Dilbert, or it was like, it was satired by the movie Office Space. If you ever saw that, that's what TI was like. It was like a Dilbert comic or Office Space. These guys were like, I mean, they were like yelling, raised voice, tempers, disrespectful to employees and to each other in the middle of the office. And we were like, this isn't helping us at all. And at some point in time, we were just like, look, we don't, that's not how we roll here. We're not going to just be shouting at everybody. And so, I don't know. I don't want to speak for them. They have their own story. I don't think they're bad human beings, but they left us in a tough spot. That's for sure.
Okay. So somehow you run on fumes for years and you make it till 2004 before the business finally collapses. And I read you called that the best education you ever received. Is that business going under?
No disrespect to my alma maters at the Haas School of Business and the Columbia Business School. But I probably learned a heck of a lot more in that period. One of the things that is interesting is, since I had no idea what I was doing back then, I had this nervous energy. It's like hard to explain the kind of nervous energy that I had when I was, that young and responsible for so much, and payroll and debt service and trying to figure out how to sell and manage. But I just read every book I could get my hands on. So, I'd go into the Barnes and Noble audiobook section of the business section, and I would just buy. I remember loading those CDs in there, back in the early 2000s, and I listened to every business book. I probably listened to more than 1,000 books over my career. Maybe it's even like 2,000 or something like that. But I had an hour commute each way, and then I was doing sales, so I was on the road a lot, and I just never went anywhere without an audiobook. I joined Entrepreneurs Organization. It was called YEO back then, but I joined Young Entrepreneurs Organization. It's now called Entrepreneurs Organization, really early on. And so then every business person I would meet, they'd have their book list. And I really just tried to learn a lot, as much as I could, in the low and cheap and free way, which was a lot of audiobooks and a lot of peer-to-peer learning. And, and eventually I started kind of understanding a little bit about leadership back then and how to run a business. But, I was too far deep in a hole, with bad leases and debt service and I want to call it a partnership. It wasn't really a partnership, but I had the software developer who I was really linked to, who wasn't trustworthy, who ended up stealing the business, and it was just like too many things to tolerate, and the business kind of toppled.
Okay, so that business goes under, and then you immediately started what's now your current company, which is Endsight.
Yeah, so a couple things about that. So one, my business partner today, my co-founder, is my college roommate from Michigan State, who also worked at TI. So my co-founder of Endsight is somebody who we've stood in each other's weddings. We've known each other since we were 18. We worked together in our early career. We worked together in a failed business, and we've had 20 some years at Endsight together. So you can imagine the trust relationship between the two of us was like the one kind of pillar that we built everything else around. And so what happened was there was one of our employees at the company that failed was a guy who I recruited to the company from a high school friend that was one of the smartest guys I knew. And he's just a brilliant guy. And I basically called him and said, hey, you want to come out and do this thing with this? And he moved from Michigan to California. And then there was another really young guy. He was our same age, who worked for the company when we bought it, who was just really in. He was like all in, like we were working like startup hours. We'd just go in the morning, we'd work till late at night, and then we'd do the same thing, and we'd be working weekends. And so we were working like a startup, even though it was kind of like not a startup. And the four of us were just kind of cranking on this thing. And so when the thing ended, we just thought, like if the four of us stick together along with the network that we built over the last 4.5 years, because 4.5 years is a lot of sales calls to go on. It's a lot of time networking in YEO. It's a lot of business experience. It's even, I had relationships with technology vendors. And so there was a lot of relationships that I had built over the 4.5 years, and a lot of knowledge I had acquired. So for one thing, I really knew how to sell. By 4.5 years, I really know how to cultivate a new customer from the sea of nothing. Right? It was a lot of telephone calls and cold emails, and I knew that grind. And so the four of us got together and we thought, hey, we had this bankruptcy attorney who coached us all the way through the bankruptcy. It was a personal and a corporate bankruptcy because we had, personally guaranteed everything. And so we got a lot of advice on, what could we do? And there wasn't a lot of limitations in terms of what we were able to do professionally following the bankruptcy. So we could go solicit old customers, we could go solicit old employees. And so, originally it was just like the four of us plus a really scrappy group of maybe 3 other people who we just, they didn't have a job anymore. And, we said, hey, you want to come and give this thing a shot? And they said, yes. And then we were just able to just build from that. And that's how Endsight started. It was a super scrappy thing. We had a tiny little office in Berkeley, very, very modest. And it was just a grind. And a year or so into it, we figured out a totally different service model than the old business. And that was this recurring IT service model where we would do unlimited help desk support. We do the systems admin for small businesses. So the previous business, PCS Networks, the one that failed, was more of a mid-market play. We sold large-scale networking projects to companies like Monster Cable in Brisbane, a very huge. There are hundreds of users. It's a large company. Or maybe people have heard of Jamba Juice. They probably remember that was big in the Bay back then. So we do like large-scale projects for more mid-market companies. And then with Endsight, what we were doing is kind of technology management for small businesses, lots of lawyers, lots of wineries, like less than 100-seat customers. And that model took off. And because it was recurring, it was natural to kind of grow. If we did a good job, which we knew how to do a good job, but we knew the technology well, then, the customers would stay and we would go off and win new customers. And one thing led to another. And, the company today is about 140 employees, 35 million in revenue, 100% bootstrapped. So, we never took any third-party capital. Two of my 4 partners, moved on, but I'm talking like, one of them moved on 16 years in and the other moved on like 20 years in. So the 4 of us were together for like 16 years. And then, 3 of us were together another 4 years after. And now it's just back to my original co-founder and I.
Wow. Okay. So, a lot of grit, a lot of resilience, a lot of self-belief, right? And just, I always ask people this, and, when you're going through, right, like those tough times, like when you go through the bankruptcy, right, like everything implodes and it just blows up, right? And like you said, you decided to just keep going, right? Because you had this network, you had this people, you had this core group of friends that you'd been grinding with for years, that you believed in each other. But even starting the new thing after all that, and taking time to scale, was there ever a point in time where you thought about giving up?
Sorry for the pregnant pause there. I don't know. I don't think so. Like, I really don't think so. Thought about it seems so small that maybe I want to say yes, but I never seriously considered giving up, to be honest.
Okay.
I seriously considered what would happen if things failed and I just couldn't do it. You know what I mean? Like I gave a lot of thought to like, what the heck would I do if everything just completely imploded and I just couldn't do it. I wasn't capable. But I never really thought about giving up. That to me is like stop putting effort into it. Just, and that was never really an option. It was like, I was like a dog with a bone. There's not much other way to think about the way I was about trying to succeed in the business. It was like, yeah, if it were possible to do it, I was gonna figure it out, and that was kind of the mentality.
Okay. And so given like the way you described the first company, PCS Networks, it seems like you made every foolish mistake possible, right? Like, right, with that whole, and then somehow you survive 4 years, that goes under. And then when you look at the run you've had with Endsight and where you're at now after 20 plus years and grown so strong, what do you attribute like the success of Endsight to, in terms of what would you do differently that caused Endsight to be so successful?
I mean, it's a multifactorial formula. The reason why I'm on these podcasts, and I host my own show now. If people are interested in it, I'm writing a book, and the ethos that I represent, or the messaging that I'm most passionate about, is, I would call it, in the domain of vision and values. But even it's really not even that. It's just not that simple. You have to do a lot of things well to be successful in business, and so we'll take it back to the very first thing. Like, the first thing we had to do was be competent business people. We had to understand the game of business. We really needed to understand how the scoreboard worked, understand financial management, understand how you have to use your profit and loss statement and your balance sheet and your cash flow as a constraint to your decisions. Like, you can't do everything, and your customers will want you to death. Your team will want you to death. You'll want yourself to death. But you have to put some constraints. And one of the things that people find impressive about Endsight, when I say it, and to me it's kind of like a little bit normal, we've never had a red month. Like, it's been 22 years. Like, we've never lost money in a reporting period. Not a quarter, not a year, not a month. And so when you run a business that's on the verge of cash flow death, you just learn that profitability is a choice. And I just look at it as a constraint. It's like, we won't make decisions that aren't, it's just like, if we can't be profitable, we won't do that. We won't bring in bad customer agreements that can't make profitable. We won't overpay people if that won't make profitable. We won't buy things or run initiatives or experiments unless they're cash flow or profitable. And so we've managed the business with that constraint. And that's like just a baby step that'll keep you alive. I really believe you have to have a good vision. So the way I've been explaining it is that this complicated formula. Kind of, you can start off, you have the successful business at the top, and then the first two prongs would be something like strategy and then culture. So, strategy is like, hey, what are we going to go do? And culture is kind of like, well, how are we going to do it? What are going to be the behavioral norms that are going to define what makes us a team? And those are the kind of the uniting principles of winning in business. And your strategy includes a lot. So it includes your go-to-market, your products and services, your agreement structures, your operating protocols and procedures. But culture is an equal partner. It's like, it's what are you going to stand for? What are the behavioral norms? How are you going to manage the human beings that are going to make your strategy come alive? And so one of the things that we did early is we set a vision, we set core values, and we set a vision. And we didn't get that right, actually, but having it wrong and being totally aligned to it is a lot better than not having it. So, being aligned to something wrong is actually better, because then you can see what happens in the world, and then you can pivot. Like, if you don't know what your strategy is or what your culture should be, it's not well defined, then you have no way of troubleshooting either thing. And so, yeah, I think, if I were trying to distill it for the point of this discussion, I would say you've got to have a good business strategy. You've got to have a great culture. And then, you have to be a competent leader, manager. You have to know what you're doing. Otherwise, you're just going to make a lot of mistakes.
Okay. All right. So you said strategy and culture are really like equal partners. Which one would you say was more difficult to get right?
I think I don't want to weak out on this questions, but it depends on the stage of your business. So, if your business is immature, then, your culture is less important at that moment. So meaning if you don't have a good product or service set, if you don't have, like at PCS Networks, our product service go-to-market was a little weak. It wasn't well differentiated. It didn't have recurring revenue, which made it kind of a hamster wheel. It was difficult to survive and grow. And so it became the biggest problem at that point in time was our strategy. It's like, we need a better go-to-market. We need a better differentiation. We need a better strategy. When you kind of get a decent strategy, so when you figure out what your niche is, like who's going to buy from you, what's your right to win, so to speak, then all of a sudden quickly culture becomes the most important item, because now you're talking about how do you execute that great strategy and how do you scale it, and that's a human managerial piece, and that's gonna require prioritizing cultural leadership.
Okay.
And
all right.
It goes back to the point where I say, like, they're equal partners and they have to be aligned. So one of the things that you didn't ask this, but maybe I'll just answer it anyway. One of the things I see is, like, a lot of leaders think that the culture should be some kind of derivative of them. And, I've had arguments or discussions or spirited debates with leaders about this, because they're like, well, how are you going to authentically lead, if it's not an authentic derivative of you? But my perspective is leaders need to adapt to whatever behavior is going to help their organizations win. And maybe they just have to grow personally to become a better human being, but just because you're away, that doesn't mean that if everybody behaves that way, that it's going to scale to a great business. In fact, if everybody behaves like you, it might be a really crappy business. Maybe you need to change your behavior. So I really think that culture needs to be the set of behaviors and principles that are going to help your strategy execute the best. And if that means adapting or growing or changing as a leader, then get to work on that. Because otherwise you're just going to be seriously inhibited in terms of execution.
Okay. No, that's fascinating, right? I haven't heard it said that way, but when you say it like that, it makes a lot of sense in terms of, because typically too, right? Like it's the CEO or the person in charge that really is kind of dictating what the culture should be, and it is, like you said, it's a derivative of them. But now you're saying it should be based on what's going to help the company win, regardless of how the leader is or what the leader wants.
Yeah, and also, you're not set in stone. Just because your dad was away or your mom was away or your teacher or a coach was away, and just because that helped you succeed as an individual or got you wherever you're at that you like, it doesn't mean that's the philosophy or the same principles that are going to get you from where you are to where you want to go. And that's, by the way, where you are and where you want to go. That's vision. People talk about a visionary and oh, this is a visionary leader. It's like, all that means, like, nobody talks about what that means, but all that means is a visionary can see a future state and they can describe it really well to a team, because nobody can build anything that can't be first described or first imagined. It's like nobody can if I say, hey, build me a house, it's like, you're not going to get much of a house. You've got to be able to describe it in extraordinary detail so that you can hand it to a team of people to build. And it's the same with a company. Like if you can't describe the future state, then nobody can build your future state. So you need to create a vision for your company, and you need to be able to describe it really well and in detail such that that people can execute it, blueprints, so to speak. But you also have to figure out, like, if everybody believed these principles and ideas and behaved this way, then my strategy and vision would emerge. And it's not always the case that, you know, your culture, if everybody did it, your vision would be realized. You might have to go look and be like, yeah, you know, like there's two kind of problems on the cultural side. One is you might ask, if everybody doing exactly what our values are? And if the answer is yes, and your vision isn't emerging, then it's pretty easy to diagnose. You're like, everybody's doing what we're asking them to do, and the vision's not emerging. So we're not asking them to do the right things. We need to ask them to do different things. And you might be the case that your values or your culture isn't broad enough. Maybe it's not aligned. Maybe there's not enough components to it. But there's, you know, then the other piece is everybody's not doing what we think they should be doing. And then you're not managing your culture well or operationalizing it well enough. And there's a bunch of tactics to try to figure out how to make your culture come to life, including clearer values, incorporating the values into hiring and firing and recognition and all these kind of dimensions. But, you know, the way I look at it is you've got both of these things, strategy and culture, and you've got to constantly be like, why aren't we achieving our vision? Do we need a different vision? Do we need a different strategy? Or do we need to like really take a serious look on our values and our behavioral norms and the way that people do things? And, are people bought into those? And if so, why? And if not, why not? And troubleshoot that.
Okay. All right. And Mike, when you look back at the whole journey, right, considering what you went through at such a young age, so eager to get out there, everything completely fell apart. You really gritted it out and you built this amazing company over 2 decades and with your friends, and you've experienced this, the success that you have. When you look back at all of it, what's been the best part of it for you?
Yeah, that's all. I have to think about it. That, you know, it's definitely something on the dimension of the human relationships I've been able to develop through the course of this thing. So, you know, if you and like that's a very wide statement, but it's like if I look back now, one of the things that's really interesting to me, Dave, is I launched this podcast. The quality of the people who I can call on the phone and say, hey, would you like to come be a guest on my podcast? And it's like, sure. And mine's not a remote podcast. It's actually, they have to drive all the way over here, or some cases fly into town to do it. And we're talking like CEOs who get like 100 solicitations for their time, you know, per day. And I call them and they're like, sure, yeah, I'll drive over to your thing and have a conversation with you. And it's like, it's a little humbling. It's like, what is it about my career that's made it such that people would say yes to that question? And it's that I've done really difficult things with people. You know, it's like, I've gone to business school with other people who have serious careers, and I've made relationships where they're like, of course I'll come and do this if you'd like me to do it. Or I'm part of professional groups like Young Presidents Organization, where, you know, I've spent a lot of time trying to, as best as I can, use whatever experience and network I can to help uplift other people in their business. And so then if I ask for something, they're saying yes, because that's kind of the nature of the relationship. Or even clients, you know, it's like, we make a very, very honest attempt to create enormous amounts of value for the customers that engage with us. Like, it's not, there's nothing about the ethos of Endsight that's a maximum extraction strategy. We're not trying to extract maximum value from customers or from employees and try to like drive shareholder value to the exclusion of everything else. It's a ecosystem of balance. It's like, how can we deliver an incredible product and service to the customer? How can we compensate individuals who work for us, and not just, by the way, like in monetary compensation, but how can we make their work meaningful, make it a good place to work, make it such that there's, community there to the degree that we can, that there's recognition for the work, make sure that there's learning and growth associated with it. So not a singular dimension of compensation, but make sure that it's a great experience for the people who work for us, while simultaneously balancing the need for the business to be solvent, profitable, a place where my business partner and I don't want to immediately flip it to a private equity because the returns are good, and that we're excited to continue to be a capital partner in our own business. So it's a balance situation. And so that's the ethos. And so it's been relationships. It's been employee relationships. It's been customer relationships. It's been professional relationships that have made this thing really, really rewarding. And if I might, I'll just tell one little story. We had a 10-year anniversary we did a little small acquisition, and there was like 6 people from that acquisition that were still around after 10 years. And so we were celebrating them all. And we threw a party at a brewery, but we invited a bunch of old colleagues that were no longer working for the company, but they were all off doing other things. And they came to celebrate their old colleagues. And 3 of them came up to me separately in a non-coordinated way and went out of their way to tell me how important their time at Endsight was to their career. Now we're talking, one person was the IT director at Birkenstock. I'm sure you know the German sandal company. One was the IT director at the Golden State Warriors. One was a senior IT leader at Facebook. So these guys have gone on to do work for big companies and all this kind of thing. And they all said a version of the same thing, which was, I'm not looking to come back. I like my job a lot. I have great pay, but I couldn't have gotten there at all if it wasn't for the learning and growth and the time and the time I spent at Endsight and the mentorship I got there and the experience. There's just no way I'd be where I'm at with my career. And it's moments like that are worth, let's say, a lot more than the financial results. It's like you learn at some point in time, it's nice it's a lot better to have money than to not have money. And I've been on both ends of that spectrum. I've been bankrupt, been trying to bootstrap a business where there's never enough cash flow to go around, where you can't afford to eat, where you're arguing over your wife about, the purchase of a chai tea latte at Starbucks. And that's no fun. So I'm not trying to minimize the difference between having financial resources and not. But at some point in time, there's just you can't buy fulfillment really, and it really comes when you can see other people succeed at who you care about, and that's what creates, I'll call it, durable meaning and purpose in your career. So it's something like that. It's something about the relationships that I've been able to develop in the course of the career.
Okay. Love that. All right. And Mike, if people want to find out more about you, your company, they want to check out your podcast, any of that, what's the best way people can find you online?
The best way is just Mike Chaput, is it .net or .com? Boy, I should know that. My YouTube channel is called The Chaput Perspective. So you can find us there. That's where we're going to be launching our podcast. We're also going to be promoting it in all kinds of ways. The company is www.endsight.net, endsight.net. So if you're interested in IT managed services, what we're really excited about now at Endsight is helping companies do technological transformation in the age of AI. So we've been managing the technology stack mostly as the primary way of customer engagement. But right now, I think that the primary way customers are going to receive value from their technology partner is in closing the gap between what technology they're using and what the technology is capable of. It made a giant leap in the last 3 years, and most of the companies out there in the small business circle are just not taking advantage of all the capabilities that AI is offering. And so we're doing a bunch of training, boot camps, services. We're doing agentic AI building. And there's a whole slew of things you have to be good at, including data management, which is something that we've been doing for more than a decade. So if you're a business person out there and you're interested in talking to somebody about technical transformation and implementing AI, that's a reason to reach out. And if you're just interested in business, I'm also writing a book, which I hope to release this year, about leadership and my principles and a lot of the stories that I had. Those are both fun stories, but they have a point. They're there to teach a kind of a lesson about leadership. So I tell a story and then I break down what I think you're supposed to know from that story in the book. So I'm doing a lot of things, trying to give back, trying to help other leaders who are looking to get as good as they can get.
Okay. All right. We will link all that in the show notes for everyone as well. All right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be here and sharing all this incredible wisdom from your journey with our listeners. We greatly appreciate it.
You're welcome. Dave, can I say one last thing before we send them off?
Sure.
Well, if you're watching and listening and you made it to the end of this episode, first and foremost, just want to thank you for your time and attention. And I know Dave feels the same way. It's a little bit annoying as a host to kind of constantly ask for the same stuff that you've heard a million times, where like, subscribe, and comment. But the thing about it is that the internet figures things out by crowdsourcing. So if you're out there and you made it to the end of the episode, it's probably because you thought it was interesting. That's a good signal that others might think it's interesting, that you probably want to know what's next on the agenda. And so it really is super helpful, not just to Dave. He doesn't get paid for this, by the way. It's kind of something that we put in the universe because we think good ideas need to be spread. And so if you like and subscribe or comment or engage, you're really doing other people a favor. You're putting a service out there in the world. So just want to make a call to action. If you've made it this far, like and subscribe, put a comment, tell us what you think, and we'd appreciate it.
All right. Mike Chaput, thanks so much.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it.
Yeah.